So good afternoon. My name is, again, Heather Sivers, and I am the Director of Security at the Air Force Lifecycle Management Engineering Directorate at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I've been doing that for about a year. Before that, I worked at the Information Protection Office, which was when I trained personnel on how to do background investigations. And I did that for the entire Air Force Lifecycle Management Center. So I was responsible for doing all of that. Prior to that, I was managing a classified storage facility that basically stored classified information, and I did that for 7 years. And then prior to that, I was a cop here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in the military. So I've had kind of various roles in the last 20-something years. And so I've been able to kind of experience all of them. So if you have any questions about any of that, I might be able to answer some of them. So to get started, also, actually before that, is anyone here going to be an engineer? Okay, great. I work at the Engineering Directorate. So if you have any questions about working for an engineering directorate, I might be able to answer some of those or get you in touch with a contact that might know more about engineering than I do, because I don't know anything about it other than the security stuff that goes with it. So, and if you have any questions, please feel free to, I'm going to take this off here. Please feel free to ask. I don't mind if you ask while I'm briefing, because I understand that if you don't know what's going on in the beginning, you might not know what's going on throughout the whole process, and I'll just totally lose you. And that is not what I'm trying to do. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and I'll try to repeat it so she can hear it and can record all of this. In case you didn't know, again, it's being recorded. Okay, so let's go on to what the agenda is. I'm going to do an overview of the security clearance process. I'm going to discuss what does the adjudicator look for. And I understand some of these terms you might go, I have no idea what you're talking about. But I will explain what all of these terms mean when I get further into this. And then what does the adjudicator consider? What are some common background issues? What can disqualify you? Eligibility granted, continuous vetting, reporting requirements, how to prepare, and some security clearance helpful links will be at the end. So, what is the overview of a security clearance process? Well, the very first thing that's basically going to initiate what you need as far as a clearance is your job. Your job that you're going into is going to require it. Your job may require you to have a top secret, a secret, or confidential. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. I don't see confidential at Wright-Pat. In the various jobs that I've done, I've never seen confidential. Maybe they do it somewhere, but what we're doing, I don't see it. So if you came to Wright-Pat, the likelihood of a confidential is going to be, I think, pretty rare. The organization will initiate your background investigation once they've identified that your job requires it. And what they're going to do is they're going to give you access to a system that's called EQIP, okay? And EQIP is the system that will allow you to access the SF-86. And SF means standard form. And then they will contact you to schedule some fingerprints. And we don't mean fingerprints like what you see in the movies when people go to jail and there's ink and all of that. We don't have that. We have electronic fingerprints today. So then you'll complete the SF-86. You'll have a certain amount of time to complete that SF-86. The normal range is 30 days, but they might push it sooner because they want you to get that done sooner to be able to fill that position, depending on what you're doing, right? So then once you have completed the SF-86 and your fingerprints have been reviewed, the results, then that is sent to the investigating agency. And what they're going to do from that point is assign you to an investigator. And that investigator is going to check out all your references, review your background to ensure that, yes, you did go to that school. Yes, you do know this person. Yes, you have not done drugs, that sort of stuff, right? All those things that are related to your background. And then once they've determined that they've talked to everybody they need to talk to, that they've gathered all the information and data about your background that they need to, then they're going to close that investigation out. So the investigator does not make a determination on whether or not you get eligibility to classified. They do not. All they're doing is gathering information, and that's it. After they've gathered everything, they've talked to everybody they need to talk to, then they're going to send all that documentation to an adjudicator. The adjudicator is the one who's actually going to determine whether or not you are eligible to have access to classified. Now, does anybody have any questions about this particular situation? Yes?
I've come across jobs that are saying, what the requirements is to already have security clearance. Is that something that one can initiate on their own to have on file to apply for jobs like that, or?
Okay, so what he was asking is he's seen where jobs require you to have a security clearance, and can you initiate that on your own, or do you have to have an organization initiate it? You cannot initiate it on your own, just so you know. It has to be initiated by the organization because we're going to give you access to a system called eQuip. An investigation does cost money, so that's partly the reason. And then the other reason is we don't want you to have the eligibility unless you actually require it to do your job. Okay? And don't get dissuaded by that because it might say this job requires you to have a top secret, but that doesn't mean you can't get one to have the job. Does that make sense? They're just saying that you need to have this to work here. That's it. So don't think that that's going to totally just disqualify you from the job.
So do they decide which top secret, secret, or confidential you get based on what's investigated, or do they only give you what the organization has been used?
Okay, so he's asking, do they give you basically what the organization is asking, or does your background investigation negate what type of clearance you're going to have? So let me clear that one up for you. So your organization might say, okay, he's going to have access to exceptionally grave damage information that would cause exceptionally grave damage. That is a top secret security clearance, okay? If your job requires you to have that, your background investigation will go just a little deeper than the one that requires you to have a secret. So you're only going to get what you need. Now, you might remain eligible, let's say, for top secret for 6 years, because it's good for 6 years. They are changing some of this stuff, but I'm going to tell you 6 years now. And basically, if you at some point got a different job and you didn't need top secret anymore and you went to secret, you're still eligible for top secret, but you're just now only going to get access to secret until that 6 years is over. Once you hit 7 years, now you're just going to be eligible for a secret because secret's good for 10. They are changing this, like I said. I just don't want to confuse you by telling you future things. Eventually, there'll be another briefing like this that'll be telling you new information because we're consistently changing things all the time. Yes?
Are there other things that are checked out in regards to background, other than what you listed earlier?
I didn't hear the last part, I'm sorry.
Is there any other thing that's listed within like the initial investigation other than the things that you listed earlier?
Yes, there's a lot. And I'll kind of go over that here a little bit more into detail what people are looking for, because I know everybody's kind of had something that you've done, right? Like we've all done something. We're not squeaky clean people, right? We've all done some things being young and going through, high school and college and right now. And we've all made some choices in life. So don't think because you've made some choices that just totally disqualifies you. We'll kind of go into further what things would actually disqualify you or potentially disqualify you, and you might be able to get a waiver. So we'll talk about that. Yes? Yeah. You do not pay for it out of your pocket. That's all paid for by the government. Okay, and we'll talk about the waiver a little bit more further, because I bet a lot of the questions you're going to have is going to be what I'm talking about next, because I kind of see the way everyone's kind of going here with their questions. So let's go to the next slide, and I think some things will start being cleared up a little bit. So this is what I think a lot of people are interested in. So what does the adjudicator look for? So once they've gotten your entire background investigation, they're going, okay, let me take a look at these 13 adjudicative guidelines and compare this person's background to this. So you see here, number 1 is allegiance to the U.S. Basically, all that means is they want to know that your loyalty is with the United States. So let me give you an example. This is a true example. I knew a gentleman who didn't even know he was a dual citizen. He didn't put it on his paperwork because he had no idea. He was born in the U.S. He went to Greece. His parents, I guess he became a citizen with Greece just by going back there because his parents were from there. And so he got dual citizenship. And so he didn't really know. And so on this background investigation, he put no because he didn't know. And of course, throughout the background investigation, they determined you're a dual citizen and we're not really gonna give you, a clearance until you relinquish your citizenship with Greece. And he tried, and Greece said, well, you need to come back and serve the military, and then we'll do that. And he thought, well, I'm not doing that, so what do I do now? And so the adjudicator said, we're happy with just you emailing them saying, regardless of whether or not they officially relinquish citizenship, you're stating that you relinquish it and you won't return there. And so that's what he did, and they gave him a top secret security clearance. But that's allegiance to the U.S. What did they do? They mitigated it, right? So there's concerns in all of these things, but that doesn't mean that that's just an absolute disqualifying factor for you. There's just mitigating things that we can do to get you a clearance. And I'll tell you what, most people get a clearance. I have to tell you, I think it's like 5%. That's how low it is. Number 2 is foreign influence. So how many contacts do you have that are foreign? Can they influence your decisions? If you're working for the government, they're looking for that. Number 3 is foreign preference. Do you prefer the United States or do you prefer China? We're not exactly best friends with China, so we might be worried about that if you have some affiliations with China, okay? Sexual behavior. Is there any charges in your background where you've had sexual charges? I will tell you that that's one thing that the government just does not really deal with very well. So if you have a sexual charge, it could be mitigated based on, were you young at the time? Did you do something that is unlikely to ever occur? And what type of charge was it? There's obviously a difference from a minor charge to a very severe charge, right? So it just depends on what it actually is, of whether or not that can be mitigated. Number 5 is personal conduct. Are you a loyal person? Are you a trustworthy person? Are you telling the truth in your SF-86? Did you have a question? Okay.
By foreign preference, what is implied is like one's political, whether they're considered like radical on political extremes and preference to like other governmental systems.
Yes. So he's asking, does foreign preference mean like you're, kind of part of different groups and organizations that might overthrow the government? Yes, that plays into it. Yes, for sure. Yep. So along with personal conduct, like if we went through your background investigation and let's say a different scenario played out for that guy that was a dual citizen and he lied about being a dual citizen, that's personal conduct, because that means you're now disloyal. You're not telling the truth. And we found out that you're a dual citizen. That's a kind of a big deal, right? Because what else are you hiding now? Number 6 is financial considerations. So I think a large majority of people are probably in debt, and that's okay if you're paying your bills. If you're not paying your bills, that's where the problem lies. Because especially if there's a pattern of bills not being paid. It's different if you've been, I don't know, I'm sure many people here, if you have a home, a mortgage, you've been potentially late at one point. If you've had one for a long time, there's been a time you've probably been late. But you know how they give you like, well, you're not officially late until, the end of the month. They don't care about that because that's not reported on your credit report. They care about what's reported on your credit report. So if you know you've got some sort of judgment against you or some sort of wage garnishment or something like that, that's likely on your credit report, right? So you want to make sure you disclose that. Number 7 is alcohol consumption. And that goes along with, addiction, right? Is there a history of DUIs in your past? One DUI isn't probably going to do it. It's going to have to be more than one because they can go back and see, okay, we've had people that honestly have clearances right now working for the government who have had DUIs and they have kept their clearance. It's just a matter of what can we do to mitigate this from continuing, right? So if we see a pattern, then likely your clearance is going to be taken from you, right? Number 8 is drug involvement. And I know many of you are worried about marijuana specifically. So we're going to talk about that. Marijuana it might be legalized to use medically in some states, like here in the state of Ohio, you can use it medically. In California, you can use it because you want to. We do work for the federal government. So when you drive on base, it's a different set of laws, okay? The state laws are different from federal laws, okay? I believe Everclear is not sold in Ohio, but it is at Wright Pat. So there you go. Different set of laws, okay? So with that being said, with marijuana, we did have a guy, I'll tell you a story, a true story, okay? He was trying to obtain a top secret security clearance. And he could not get one because they said, listen, on your SF-86, you put that you smoked marijuana for the last 2 years, and we want to know more information. And he said, well, what would you like to know? And basically they said, we want approximate dates of when you may have smoked marijuana. And he was like, he looked at me and he said, Heather, what am I supposed to do? What date do I even start with? And I'm going to tell you something funny. And I said, I recommend 420. For those of you who know what that means. And we kind of laughed, because he was so nervous. I was trying to calm him down about the fact that, he might not get a clearance. And he kept thinking, I might not have a job. I don't know what's going to happen. And I said, if they thought that, they wouldn't have asked for this information. They would have said, you're done, right? They asked for it because they were trying to mitigate concerns. So he wrote all the dates down and he said, I did it because I had some anxiety and I was hanging around some friends and, we kind of just did it a couple times a month, and he wrote down some dates of, 3 or 4 times a month that he did it, right? And he basically said at the end, I will not use this anymore. I know that I have a clearance now, and I know that I have to no longer partake in this drug in order to maintain my eligibility. So guess what he did? He stopped. And guess what? He got his clearance. So he had smoked marijuana for 2 years. And recently, while he was in college, he was a young college student and got his clearance. So don't think that you aren't going to get a security clearance. Now, if it was heroin, I'm not sure that it would have went the same way, okay? But again, I'm telling you, they look at how minor and how major, right, the drug is, or how minor the offense is and how major the offense is. So criminal conduct is another one. Let's say you were young and you got, what's a common young offense? I guess shoplifting, probably, theft, some sort. Maybe damaging someone's property. I could see that being a common thing in the criminal conduct a young person would potentially do. So let's say you did something like that. Obviously, they're looking and going, okay, is it a minor? Is it a major thing that happened? Is it something that we are concerned about reoccurring, right? So that's the kind of stuff they're looking at criminally. How major is it? How minor is it? Psychological conditions. So a lot of people in the military have, been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, right? PTSD. That is not considered as a psychological condition to the adjudicator. Family counseling, we don't care about that either. We don't care about marital counseling. What they're mostly concerned about is, have you been diagnosed with a severe mental health issue? And what is it? And is it major or minor? Okay? Because there's a minor bipolar disorder, right? People can function and be just fine. Then there's major, or maybe that's not possible, right? So it just depends on the diagnosis and how major or minor it is. And I know I have criminal conduct on here again. That was a mistake. It was supposed to be outside activities. And that means, that's kind of related to his question earlier about your allegiance to the US. Are you part of any political parties, or are you engaged in any groups that are trying to overthrow the government? Or are they criminal groups, And then there's use of information technology systems. So have you ever used your cell phone or your laptop in a criminal manner? Or have you had access to classified systems before and you've done some things that you should not have done? So what they do, the adjudicators, they closely review your entire background and they determine if there's any red flags. Red flags don't mean you don't get a clearance. They just mean, hey, he's a dual citizen. That's interesting. Let's look into that further. It's basically a concern. Oh, they've smoked marijuana. That's a concern. Let's look into it further. Those are what they mean by red flags. Does anybody have questions? Yes.
So what if you're on the opposite side of the spectrum where you don't have any criminal background, not even a speeding ticket, no offenses?
I'm actually going to get into that next, so I'm glad you asked. So let's go into that. So I'll get into this in the next slide, not this one, but the following one will tie into your question, which was, she asked, what if you have a squeaky clean background? And I'll kind of go into that in the next slide, not this one. So what does the adjudicator consider? And we've kind of gone over some of this as far as examples go, but they look at the whole person and they carefully weigh several different factors. In evaluating the relevance of an individual's conduct, the adjudicator considers a lot of stuff. As you can see here, there's 9 different things they consider. One of them is the nature of the offense, the extent of it, and the seriousness, which I've kind of harped on this already. And number 2 is the circumstances surrounding the conduct. Was there some kind of unusual circumstance where you were involved in something that likely you would never be involved in again? And then the frequency. How often did you do this stuff? Number 4 is individual's age and maturity at the time of conduct. It's obviously different if we look at somebody's background and we say, well, they did this when they were 20 versus when they're 40. It's a difference, right? Because you're a lot more mature at 40 than at 20. Your participation in the conduct, were you the one who actually committed the crime, or were you just present and also got in trouble? Number 6 is present or absence of rehabilitation and permanent behavioral changes. So that kind of speaks for itself. Maybe you did have an issue with, let's say, prescription drug use, okay? You were prescribed drugs, prescription, and you got addicted to them. And you were addicted for a year, let's say, and then you have now been 2 years, you went through a rehabilitation and you're now squeaky clean and there's been no problems. You're likely going to get a clearance, okay? The motivation of conduct. What motivated you to do it? Number 8, potential for pressure, coercion, exploitation, or duress. That kind of aligns too with the foreign stuff, right? And then number 9, the likelihood of continuation or reoccurrence. What is the chance you'd do it again? So let's talk about, I'm sorry, it's not even on this slide. I think it's on the next slide. I'll answer your question. But some common background issues. The top 4 common issues personnel may have in their background and some mitigating factors. I will tell you the number 1 biggest thing we see is financial considerations, meaning you haven't paid your bills. And we'll see, we'll pull credit reports and you'll see the whole thing. What bills haven't been paid, how long, how much you owe, and all of that stuff. So let's say there was a point in time in your history where you were not making your credit card payments. Maybe something happened. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you had a sick family member, that you had to pay some hospital bills. Maybe you just were young and you made some bad choices, right? They look at length and time. How long has it been since it's been mitigated? Your age at the time, and is there a payment plan in place? So all of those things can be mitigating. And we've had people who currently have a security clearance and we get an alert and it tells us, hey, this person's got some bills, and it tells us how much. And then we reach out to them and they say, I'll get a payment plan in place. They put a payment plan in place and everything's all good. They never lost their clearance. They maintained their clearance and everything's fine. Criminal conduct is the second. And an example of that we kind of used was theft, because I feel like that's a common one. And again, it's the same mitigating factors, except for some additional ones I threw in there was the likelihood of occurrence. Maybe you were hanging around a bad group of friends and you all were shoplifting and now you don't hang out with those friends. So the likelihood of occurrence, there's no factors there to make it a likelihood of occurring. You're no longer friends with those people. Marijuana use. Again, same kind of concept, length and time, age at the time, and then currently not using. DUI or OVI, same type of situation, but maybe in addition you took some rehabilitation classes and now you're rehabilitated and there's no problems. Any questions about that? Hopefully this is all making sense to everybody. Okay? Yes?
In order to rehab and stuff like that, how's that usually, checked out? Do you have to sign a waiver?
Yes, you do. So it's basically when you fill out your SF-86, there's going to be some signatures that you have to sign, some documents at the end. And it's going to basically say that we're looking into your medical background, and that would be a rehabilitation. And then they're looking into your criminal background, they're looking into your personal background, they're looking into financial background. So there's some separate documents that you'll sign related to financial and medical stuff. And basically that way, like the HIPAA law, if that applies, then you're actually signing saying, yes, you can view my medical background.
How long is the form?
How long? What was that?
Yeah, how many pages?
Oh, I don't even want to tell you how many pages it is because you'll be like, wow. It's almost, I want to say, yeah, you're roughly right, and I have a link to it. There's more pages than that, but some of them are signature pages, and some of them are in the beginning. It kind of outlines all the legal information. So the actual documents you fill out are probably what you said. And then there's some additional documents, and some of them may not apply to you. So don't go, oh my gosh, that sounds like a nightmare to fill out. If you have like an easy background with none of foreign stuff, like it's just like, I don't do anything, I'm not in trouble, I haven't done that, it's going to be pretty simple for you to fill it out. It becomes a little more complicated when you have a lot of foreign contacts, you've done a lot of foreign travel. It just becomes a little bit more cumbersome to complete. Did I answer your question? Sure.
Pretty much states yourself. So
If
therefore, when it comes down to family or friends and stuff like that, that you really don't have those things because you really just stay isolated.
Okay. That's an interesting question. They are going to want contacts, I will tell you that. So they'll ask for example, they'll want to talk to family members for sure. They will want to, because they ask, sister, brother, mother, father, stepfather, stepmother. They ask for those people's names, their addresses, phone numbers. So they'll want to talk to somebody that's in your family for sure. They'll want to talk to somebody who knew where you lived. They'll want to talk to somebody who you might have gone to school with. And if you don't talk to like people at school, maybe a teacher or somebody can vouch that you're there. There's other ways to kind of get past this. I know like some people who have said, I don't talk to my sister. I just don't like her. So I haven't talked to her in 20 years. I don't even know if she lives here anymore. And I said, just put a comment down that states that. Because it's one thing to go, hey, I don't talk to my entire family, than to say, I don't talk to my sister. So they'll be okay with like one, but if it's like the whole family, then I think it becomes a little questionable to them. Like, okay, well, who do we talk to make sure that you are who you say you are?
So does it have to be a family member and someone that knows you?
Yes. Mm-hmm. It's a mixture usually, but if you have some mitigating factors that exist that would be acceptable, then they would also go, okay, well, maybe we can understand that and move on. But they will definitely want to talk to somebody. Yes, ma'am.
Is the investigator limited in information he or she's able to seek out? For example, social media fair game for them to determine the answer to some of these questions?
So she just asked, what is the investigator limited on? Can they access social media? Yes, they can. You can, yes, if anything that is public, they can access. So if you've made your account private, my understanding is they might not be able to see everything, but they can see what you've put out there publicly, if that makes sense. Now, another thing is if you froze your credit report, you used to have to like release your credit report. Now you don't. They can just view your credit report too. So that's another kind of thing in the last couple of years that they've changed. Anything else? Okay. So what can disqualify you? We'll talk about that. Not being a U.S. citizen can disqualify you. Now, dual citizenship does not mean you're not a U.S. citizen. Dual citizenship means you are a U.S. citizen, but you're also maybe a Greek citizen or a citizen of another country. Dishonorably discharged from the military is another disqualifying example, and currently involved in illegal drug use. Have been judged as mentally incompetent or mentally incapacitated by a mental health professional. Have been convicted in a U.S. federal or state court, including courts-martial, sentenced to imprisonment for a term exceeding 1 year and incarcerated for not less than 1 year. I know that's confusing, so let me just explain that a little bit. So let's say you were charged with some sort of criminal offense and you were sentenced to 1 year in prison, okay? But you only served 9 months. You were still sentenced to 1 year, whether you served 1 year or not. That's a disqualifying example. Security clearance has been revoked for security reasons. Now, I don't want you to think, oh my gosh, I cannot get a security clearance because of all of this. The chances of you getting a security clearance not being a U.S. citizen, I can tell you, you will not get one. Dishonorably discharged from the military, it's a possibility depending on what it was. Being incapacitated as a mental person, not probably going to happen. Being convicted in the U.S., like in a prison for less than 1 year or a sentence to 1 year, depending on what it is. How long ago was it? There's mitigating factors, right? But you're going to need a waiver now. And I've seen people with waivers, and it is possible to get a waiver. I've seen somebody who's had 2 DUIs, went to prison over one of them, but he was very young when he did it. And it's been now 5 years. He got a security clearance. So it just depends on what the situation is. So I don't want you to look at this and go, totally not going to happen for me. That's not exactly true. There are waivers that you can get for some of these things. Yes?
Can you expound a little bit more on number 4?
Number 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So have been judged as mentally incompetent, that one? So he just wants me to explain this one. So that means, like, did you basically did a mental health professional basically state that you are mentally incompetent? So that means, like, let's say, I guess the best way to say this is if you're a parent and maybe your parenting is not good and you seem to have a lot of mental health problems and the judge has said you are not mentally fit to take care of your child. That would be an example. Does that make sense?
So it would have to be like a serious incident like that.
Yes.
And a judge telling you.
Yes, it would be like judge mentally incapacitated, because someone has to say, you have a health professional that can pretty much diagnose you with a mental health issue, and when they get the medical records, they can determine if any of that is too crazy or not. But what I'm trying to say is usually it's judged, like someone has deemed you as that.
So that's usually something within just the court of law.
Yes, usually something by court of law, yes.
Only the court of law. Or
So they can also look at your background and your medical records, and if something seems concerning, they might ask you more questions to mitigate concerns. So it just depends on what the situation is, because there's so many variables that can exist here. Does that make sense? So eligibility granted. Yes, ma'am.
I had a question about like dual citizenship. Are you not allowed to be a dual citizen at all?
Okay. So she asked, can you be a dual citizen or can you not be a dual citizen at all? So you can be a dual citizen in some instances. It really depends. We won't like if you're a dual citizen to China, I can tell you that. So it just depends on, are you willing to relinquish it? What is your history with this country? And what type of relationship does the U.S. have with this country? Are we friends or enemies? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So eligibility granted, let's say everything, we've gone through everything, and now the adjudicator's reviewing your background and going, okay, no issues. Remember that squeaky clean question? If I have a squeaky clean background, what's the outcome? The outcome is, it's easy. You're gonna get your security clearance faster than somebody who has issues. So if there are issues and they have to mitigate them, it's gonna take longer. Security clearance access is then granted. So first it's eligibility. So they say, yep, you're eligible. Then your organization will grant you the access to it. So they'll actually give you top secret, or confidential access. And then you're accessing classified. So basically what needs to happen here before they give you access is you need to have that favorable background investigation, whether it says top secret, or confidential. No more than a 2-year break in service. That means if you worked for the government previously and it's been more than 2 years and you had a security clearance then, and it's been 2 or more years, now you need a new security clearance. So they can't just grant you access again. So let's say you worked at Wright Pat, you got your clearance, then you stopped working at Wright Pat for 2 or more years. Now you got to get a new clearance. Even though it hasn't been 6 years, you can't have a break working for the government with your classified accesses. Yes.
So if you've been working with top secret stuff for like 6 years, the security clearance expires, right?
It doesn't, it's kind of funny. They don't say it expires. They just use the term out of scope.
Okay.
So it means you need another investigation again.
So you need to, is it like completely redo the whole process, or is it quicker with renewing?
It's quicker with renewing because you don't have to get the fingerprints, but if you've had a 2-year or more break in service, they're going to make you get fingerprints again. And then if you change, like if you had a secret security clearance and you went to a top secret, you'll have to get fingerprints again. So there's just certain scenarios where you'll get fingerprints again, but once you filled it out, the information stays in there. So if you haven't had a lot of changes in your life, it's pretty easy to do it again. It's the first time that's the hardest part. And the second and all times after that, it's way easier. Yes.
And if you get a top secret, you're automatically like eligible to access the lower.
Yes, you are automatically eligible to access lower. Yes. And then you'll sign what's called a non-disclosure agreement before you get granted access, and that just says that you will not disclose information. Yes.
How much of the medical background are investigators, will they have access to? But obviously, as mentioned, there is the mental characteristics, but what about like physical, like epilepsy or some other things? Would those be taken into any kind of consideration?
So he just asked, how deep do they go into your medical background and like physical things like epilepsy? Is that like a no? So I can't specifically state that epilepsy itself is a disqualifying factor because I'm not an adjudicator, but I can kind of give you an idea. It depends on what the circumstances are because like I said, they use the whole scenario. So if epilepsy is really bad and it's like affecting your entire life, then you probably have a greater chance of potentially not getting that clearance than if the epilepsy is under control. Does that make sense? So it just depends on the situation, but I can't say that's a hard no or a hard yes. They're just looking at all the circumstances that surround it.
They will still have access to them.
Yes, they will.
Be entitled to that.
Yes. They will have access to all of that information. Continuous vetting. So this is after you're all done getting your clearance and everything, then you're enrolled into what's called continuous vetting. This is a new process in the last couple of years. They've done this. So after your clearance is adjudicated, you'll be enrolled into continuous vetting. Let me explain what continuous vetting is. Your SF-86 that you fill out is put into a system that runs all these checks, okay? So there's criminal, terrorism, financial databases, and public records that it's looking for. So you're continuously being monitored. Before continuous vetting, there was a lot of things that we didn't know because we just knew what we knew that you put down on your SF-86 and we did the background check then, and then we didn't background check you, right? So it could be 3 or 4 years, 5, 6 years, 10 years later before we get another background check on you again, and maybe there's some stuff that happened that we didn't know about. Now, we don't have to wait. And let me go into further what I mean by that. So with reporting, once you have your security clearance, you have an obligation to report anything that applies to those 13 adjudicative guidelines. So for example, foreign travel, foreign contacts, any arrests, DUIs, and financial delinquencies. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you have to report once you have your security clearance. If you do not report, you do run the risk of losing access or not access. Well, I should say, yes, access and eligibility. So access is pulled by the organization's commander. Eligibility is pulled by the adjudicator. Does that make sense, what I just said? So, yes.
Could not reporting something result in criminal charges?
So he asked, does not reporting something result in criminal charges? No. That's depending if you did something criminally and the cops maybe weren't involved, maybe yes in that case, but not on our end. We do not do anything like that. We only deal with your security clearance. There could be some negative consequences like writing you up if you were like in the military or a government civilian, or if you worked as a contractor, your company would do that. So there could be some write-ups, like you might get written up for something, but it just depends on what the scenario is. Continuous vetting, when I kind of said I would talk about that a little bit further. So you'll be monitored, your background, right? So whether or not you report something, we're going to know about it. So let me explain. So we had a gentleman at my organization who got enrolled into continuous vetting in February of this year, okay? I got an alert that came down to me that said, hey, this person has a DUI, and he didn't report it, and it was back in 2016. What year is it? Okay, yeah, 2022. So that was a long time ago. Well, he had a secret clearance, so he wasn't due for an investigation for a few more years, right? And he got enrolled. And people are getting auto-enrolled. Mostly everyone's auto-enrolled now, but before that, people were getting randomly enrolled at different various times. And so he got auto-enrolled during that like February timeframe, and then that DUI came. And then I went to him and I said, hey, what happened here? And he said, well, I was at, downtown Dayton, and I was waiting on an Uber, and I got in my car and I had my keys on me. I said, was the car started? And he said, no. I said, was the keys in the ignition? And he said, no. And I said, oh, wow, I guess I didn't realize you could get a DUI for that. And so they lowered his charge down to physical control. but it still showed on the system when they ran the checks that he was charged with a DUI, because that's what he initially was charged with, and then they lowered that charge. So in case you all didn't know that, you can get a DUI that way. So yes.
So stuff like even just getting charged for something would show up on the report?
Yes. He asked, will stuff that's just charged show up on the report? Yes. So then we ask for the court documentations to say what happened. And that's what I did. And it was like, okay, simple, right? Sent it off to the adjudicator. Guess what? Same exact day he was adjudicated. They maintained his clearance, So things happen to people. We're all not like perfect. So, and that's not what the government expects. Any questions about that? Okay, so how to prepare. So you can fill out a blank SF-86 online, and it requires information going back 10 years. In most cases, though, the instructions will state not to list information before your 18th birthday unless they need that minimum 2-year history. If any of the 13 adjudicative guidelines apply to you that we went over in here, I would gather documentation to mitigate that, just to prepare. Because if you're ready, like say you're going to get your security clearance and you've got all this stuff ready to go, it's going to be so fast, your whole process. It's just going to go faster than those who don't. And you can start working faster than somebody else who didn't have all that stuff ready. Ensure you have a government-issued photo ID, such as a driver's license as well. Any questions there?